Be agreed to.
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the words after that be omitted and the following substituted. That this House has no confidence in the national government because these supplementary estimates fail to address the underlying problems and omissions from Budget 2009, which remain uncorrected in Budget 2010, namely the triple deficit of grossly inadequate national savings, made worse by the halving of KiwiSaver incentives and the indefinite deferral of pre-funding contributions to the New Zealand superannuation scheme, a deep, persistent and dangerous current account deficit driven by a growing net investment imbalance and a financial sector that is almost entirely foreign-owned, and an innovation deficit made worse by scrapping the research and development tax credits and the Fast Forward Fund, resulting in increasing reliance on commodity trade that is highly exposed to price fluctuations. Mr. Speaker, the supplementary estimates record changes in appropriations made during the previous fiscal year to ensure that all expenditure is transparent and all funds appropriately dealt with. In other words, they record changes to the direction of fiscal travel since the previous budget was brought down. Accordingly, sir, we must look to the supplementary estimates to see if any action was taken by the government over the fiscal year following Budget 2009. Mr. Speaker, one thing is also clear from the impressed supply bill that has been introduced without prior notice in this debate, and that is that there is no mention of the Pacific Economic Development Association, which the Minister of Finance has said does not contain a guaranteed appropriation. And yet, sir, if it was not to have that appropriation, we would expect to see that spelt out somewhere in this impressed supply bill, which it does not, sir. This simply provides a blanket authority for all of the budget lines set out in Budget 2010, which included an explicit appropriation for the Friends of the National Party dressed up in a 57-word proposal under the name Pacific Economic Development Association, a PETA, sir, that will come back to bite the Minister on many occasions. But, sir, Budget 2009 was remarkable for what it did not do. After 9 long years in opposition and the spur of the most significant international financial crisis since the Great Depression, Bill English looked every bit like a deer caught in the headlights. And had it not been for Labour's far-sighted and well-timed stimulus package in Budget 2008, the casualties of that roadkill would have been tens of thousands more New Zealand jobs. Budget 2009 did precisely nothing, sir, to help them. Nothing to address the rising cost of living like food, power, rents and rates. Nothing to offset the loss of overtime, wage rises foregone and businesses drying up due to a lack of domestic and export demand. Nothing to heal the hurt of communities torn apart by massive layoffs and plant closures. Indeed, it made only one major decision: to postpone, it said for a decade, but in reality indefinitely, pre-funding of New Zealand's superannuation. And having wrecked KiwiSaver and the R&D tax credits almost immediately on taking office in order to fund the previous round of upper income tax cuts, National did not even appear interested in a plan for jobs and incomes or in rebalancing this economy. Instead, we were forced to watch while the so-called do-fest of the Jobs Summit produced a cycle way to nowhere and a 9-day fortnight scheme that was so badly patronised by business, the government itself canned it in the middle of a recession. And while the government was PR spinning, real New Zealanders were losing their jobs, their incomes and their hopes. Unemployment rose from 3.4% under Labor to 7.1%, and 60,000 Kiwi breadwinners and families were robbed of their security and robbed of their future. There are few social ills, Mr. Speaker, crueler than unemployment, and New Zealanders deserve more than spin, more than a so-called rolling maul of short-term responses. They deserved a real, credible, strategic plan to create and protect jobs and rebalance this economy. Mr. Speaker, they did not get it in Budget 2009, and they have not got it in the supplementary estimates, which are the subject of this debate. Mr. Speaker, the interesting thing is that there is now broad agreement across the floor of this House that the New Zealand economy is grossly unbalanced, and, sir, that urgent change is required. Mr. Speaker, even the Minister of Finance has described New Zealand's net international liabilities as New Zealand's greatest single vulnerability. And the reality is, sir, New Zealanders are beset by a triple deficit. They do not save enough, we do not save enough to wean ourselves off an almost total reliance on foreign capital. As a result, our net international indebtedness, as the Minister has pointed out, is approaching 100% of our gross domestic product. That is $40,000, sir, or round figures, for every man, woman and child in New Zealand. $40,000 each every New Zealander owes to foreign lenders, while this government does nothing about it. And by far, sir, the majority of that debt is private debt, not government debt. And so while fiscal prudence remains important, no amount of trimming the government's sails by cutting night classes and ACC benefits, sir, is going to turn the boat around, which is the lack of private savings in this economy. National has produced no solutions to this crisis, and indeed has made it worse. Sir, New Zealand does not export enough to consistently close a yawning current account deficit that's forecast to blow out again from 3% to over 7% of GDP, according to Treasury estimates. Selling public assets like Kiwi Bank or private assets like dairy farms makes no sense, simply to make up the difference because we are not paying our way as a nation. Selling our best assets means fewer income streams down the track, and eventually a doom loop sets in as we are simply unable to catch up or to keep up. And, sir, opening up the Overseas Investment Commission to further liberalisation simply makes that matter worse. Thirdly, sir, New Zealand does not innovate enough to sustainably lift our productivity, wages and international competitiveness, but instead, under this government, appears to be falling back on the age-old habit of being price takers on a commodity price path that resembles the orbit of a yo-yo, adding value to our extraordinary primary produce through the ingenuity of our farmers and scientists, and enhancing our natural environment in doing so goes hand in hand with improving the sustainability of our earnings and underpinning an outstanding quality of life. Accordingly, sir, what Labor, sir, was looking for in these supplementary estimates was the kind of plan Labor would have put in place to improve savings, exports and innovation and to rebalance this economy. And let's consider a couple of the key elements very briefly. Fact, Labor brought in KiwiSaver that meant an ordinary Kiwi worker could put in 4% of their wages and get 10% back as a total contribution to savings, retiring and security. National cut those benefits in half in their first few months. Why? To pay for tax cuts for upper income earners. Fact, Labor pre-funded New Zealand's superannuation so our old people could be secure in the dignity of their retirement. Fact, National has postponed indefinitely pre-funding super because they did not have the responsibility to take a long-term view. Mr Speaker, fact, National did nothing in Budget 2009 to turn around the savings gap, and fact, Labor will lead on savings by 2011 through new safe savings products that Kiwis can depend on by restoring and strengthening KiwiSaver.